By the time I reached Karama, I was exhausted. It had been a long flight from London to Dubai, followed by back-to-back meetings that drained every ounce of energy from my body. I was in the city for a business deal, something about real estate development. But at that moment, all I wanted was a place to crash for the night. Most hotels in Dubai were far beyond my budget. I didn't mind luxury, but when I checked my company's expense policy, it was clear I had to keep costs low. That's how I ended up at an old, run-down hotel in Karama, a place that, at first glance, looked like it had been forgotten by time. The receptionist, a thin man with deep-set eyes, barely spoke as he slid me a key. His uniform was slightly wrinkled, and when he finally looked up, I noticed the dark circles under his eyes. "Room 308, he muttered. I nodded, took the key, and dragged my suitcase toward the elevator. The hotel smelled of something old, dust, stale air, and a faint, musty odor that reminded me of places abandoned for too long. The hallway leading to my room was dimly lit, with flickering lights casting shadows that twisted unnaturally. When I reached my room, I hesitated. The number 308 was slightly scratched off the door, like someone had tried to remove it. Brushing off the unease, I pushed the key into the lock and stepped inside. The room was basic: a small bed, a rickety nightstand, and a window covered with thick curtains. The air conditioning unit rattled noisily, and the walls had stains that looked too dark to be water damage. I ignored it. Sleep was all I needed. But as soon as I lay down, the noises started. At first, it was subtle, just the faint creaking of floorboards outside my door. I assumed it was another guest. But then came the knocking, a slow, deliberate knock, knock, knock on my door. I sat up, my heart suddenly pounding. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. The knocking stopped. I exhaled and lay back down. It was probably some drunk guest. Then the whispers started. At first they were faint, just a soft murmur outside my door. But as I strained to listen, the voices became clearer. Two people, a man and a woman. They were whispering in Arabic. I understood a little, but the only word I caught was help. I sat up again. My throat was dry. I got up, stepped toward the door, and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. A chill ran down my spine. I locked the door, checking it twice, and backed away. Maybe it was exhaustion messing with my head. I climbed back into bed and forced my eyes shut. At exactly 3:08 a.m., I woke up gasping, not because of a noise, but because something was in my room. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of something rotten. The curtains fluttered, though the windows were shut. My chest tightened and my ears rang as I slowly turned my head toward the foot of the bed. A woman stood there, staring at me. Her face was half-burned, her eyes sunken and black. She did not blink. I couldn't move. My body was frozen in fear. Then she opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, I heard something else, a deep, wet breathing sound from the closet. The woman's head jerked to the side, and suddenly she was gone, like she had never been there. But the breathing remained, slow, raspy, like someone struggling for air. The closet door was slightly open. I reached for my phone with shaking hands, turned on the flashlight, and pointed it toward the closet. The light flickered. The breathing stopped. Then the closet door slammed shut on its own. I bolted out of the room. I didn't stop running until I reached the reception desk, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The receptionist, the same tired-looking man, barely flinched when he saw me. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Room 308. I nodded, gasping for breath. He didn't look surprised. "Who used to stay there?" I demanded. He hesitated. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "No one stays there. Not for long." I swallowed hard. "Tell me the truth," he exhaled. "A couple used to live there, years ago. A woman and her husband. They fought, a lot. One night, he locked her in the closet and set the room on fire." I felt my stomach turn. "He died too," the receptionist added. "Smoke inhalation. The police found his body outside the door, like he tried to leave, but something wouldn't let him. I stared at him. "You should go," he said simply. I didn't argue. I grabbed my bag, checked out without another word, and stepped outside. The humid night air felt thick, but it was better than being inside. As I got into my car, I glanced up at the third floor. The window to room 308 was open, and for just a split second I saw a shadow standing there, watching. I drove away without looking back. I never told anyone about that night. I never stayed in Karama again. The wind carried the scent of sand and something older, something I couldn't quite name. It was the kind of air that made the hairs on my arms stand up, even in the oppressive heat. The sun was setting as we reached Al Madam, the infamous abandoned village buried in the dunes of Sharjah, and I could already feel the weight of the place pressing down on me. I had always been drawn to places like this, places with stories buried under time and dust. My name is Omar Rahman. I'm 28 years old, and I document lost places for a living. Along with my two friends, Aisha and Farid, we had decided to spend the night in Al Madam, capturing the whispers of a town that had no right to be empty. The houses, half buried in the sand, looked frozen in time. Some still had furniture inside, relics of the people who had lived there decades ago. Why did they leave? No one knew for sure. Some said the village was built on cursed ground, that Jinn had driven the people away. Others believed more logical explanations, bad planning, harsh desert winds. I wanted to believe the latter, but the moment we stepped past the first house, I felt it. We were not alone. Farid, the most skeptical among us, laughed as he kicked at a broken clay pot half buried in the sand. "People probably got bored and left," he said. "You two are just hoping for ghosts." Aisha shot him a look. She was quiet, cautious. Unlike Farid, she listened when a place spoke. The first strange thing happened as we set up camp near the largest house. Footprints in the sand. Not ours. Not leading to any door. Just appearing around us in random patterns, as if someone had walked here minutes before but never arrived or left. Aisha noticed them first. "Those weren't there when we arrived," she murmured. Farid snorted. "The wind shifts sand around, you know," but I saw the tension in his shoulders. We spent the next hour filming, walking through the empty homes. Inside, it was eerie. Rooms with sand-swallowing chairs, doors creaking even though there was no breeze. Something was wrong with the silence here. It wasn't just emptiness. It was waiting. At one point, as I filmed inside a particularly well-preserved house, Aisha grabbed my arm. "Listen," she whispered. I held my breath. A sound, distant yet close. A whisper carried by the wind. Not words, but something that felt like language. We ran outside, expecting to see someone. But there was no one. Only the dunes, stretching endlessly under the dimming sky. As night fell, things got worse. We gathered near our tents, lighting a small fire for warmth. The desert got cold quickly, and the temperature drop felt unnatural, as if something was pulling the heat away. Then the whispers started again. This time they were clearer. Not wind, not imagination, voices. Farid's bravado cracked. That's just the wind hitting the buildings weird, right?" Aisha didn't respond. She was staring at something behind me. I turned. A figure stood at the entrance of the largest house. Tall, unmoving, shrouded in shadow. I couldn't make out a face, but I knew it was looking at us. Then it stepped forward. Farid scrambled backward, knocking over our lantern. The fire flickered violently, casting twisted shadows against the sand. I blinked, and the figure was gone. But the footprints, they were still there, leading toward us. "We need to leave," Aisha said, her voice shaking. "Now." I nodded, but as I turned, I saw movement inside the house. A flash of white fabric, like a person stepping deeper into the darkness. And then, the door slammed shut. We ran. Our car was parked just outside the village, but the sand had shifted, half burying the tires. As we struggled to push it free, the voices grew louder, urgent, angry. Then they screamed, not in pain, in rage. Something wanted us gone. The headlights flickered. The engine refused to start. I turned to look back just for a second, and I saw them, figures standing in the doorways of every house, watching, silent, waiting. The car roared to life, and we tore out of there, sand kicking up behind us. The moment we crossed the invisible threshold of the village, the voices stopped. I looked in the rearview mirror. The village was empty again. We never spoke about what happened that night. Not fully, not even to each other. But none of us ever went back to Al Madam. Some places aren't meant to be disturbed. I had always been drawn to places that carried a sense of abandonment, where time stood still and history whispered from the cracks in the walls. As a photographer, my work revolved around capturing forgotten places, urban decay, lost civilizations, places that once thrived but had since been left behind. So when I first heard about Jazirat al-Hamra, the legendary abandoned village in Ras Al Khaimah, UAE, I knew I had to see it for myself. My name is Daniel Foster, 34 years old, and at the time I was working on a personal project, a photo series on ghost towns around the world. I had traveled from the UK to the Middle East specifically for this, eager to capture the eerie beauty of the place. Jazirat al-Hamra had been abandoned decades ago, leaving behind rows of crumbling houses, wind-worn mosques, and an overwhelming silence. Some called it haunted. Others dismissed it as mere folklore. I didn't believe in ghosts. I believed in light, in shadows, in the way decay told its own story through a camera lens. I arrived in December of 1999, the air dry and cool, the sky a dull gray that made the village seem even more desolate. I had hired a driver from Ras Al Khaimah to take me to the site, but when we reached the dirt road leading to the village, he refused to go any further. "This place is cursed," he muttered in Arabic, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. I tried to reassure him, told him I would be fine, but he shook his head violently. "If you go, go alone." And so I did. The village was exactly as I had imagined, empty, silent, frozen in time. The low stone buildings stood in defiance of the desert winds, their walls eroded by years of neglect. I walked through the narrow alleyways, my boots crunching against dry sand and brittle debris. Doors hung loosely on rusted hinges, swaying the occasional gust of wind. I set up my camera in the main square, positioning my tripod to frame the old mosque in the distance. The call to prayer hadn't echoed through these streets in years, yet the place still carried an air of solemn reverence. As I took my first shots, a strange feeling settled in my chest, like I was being watched. I ignored it, blaming my own mind for playing tricks on me. But then, when I checked the images on my camera screen, something wasn't right. In one of the frames, a figure stood at the mosque's entrance. A man, his face obscured by the grainy contrast of the shadows. My breath caught. I looked up immediately. There was no one there. I scrolled through my images again, my fingers trembling slightly. The figure had not been in the frame before, yet now, in this single shot, he stood perfectly still, as if watching me. I told myself it was a trick of the light, an illusion cast by the ruins. I forced myself to move on, but with every photo I took, the feeling of unease grew stronger. Then the whispering started. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as I stood still, listening, I realized it was something else. Soft voices, hushed and overlapping, coming from the empty houses around me. I turned slowly, my heart pounding. The whispers came from all directions, filling the space between the ruins. I stepped backward, my foot hitting something solid. I looked down. In the sand, there were fresh footprints. Not mine. Something cold crawled up my spine. Someone had been standing right behind me. I swung my camera up, clicking the shutter blindly in the direction of the footprints. The flash illuminated the village in a harsh white light, revealing nothing but empty space. The whispers stopped. The air became unnaturally still. Even the wind seemed to vanish. Then, from the mosque's entrance, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps on stone. Deliberate, slow. I didn't think. I ran. I grabbed my tripod, my camera swinging wildly around my neck as I bolted back through the alleys. My heartbeat roared in my ears. The village seemed larger now, its pathways unfamiliar, twisting in directions I hadn't seen before. The mosque, the ruins, they all blurred together, stretching unnaturally as if the village itself was shifting around me. Then, up ahead, a man stood in the middle of the alley. He wore traditional Emirati clothing, his white kandura stained with something dark. His face was blurred, as though my eyes refused to focus on it. I stopped abruptly, my breath caught in my throat. The man tilted his head as if studying. Then, in a voice that was not his own, he whispered, "You should not be here." I turned and ran the other way. The village was closing in, the walls narrowing, the shadows growing longer. I ran until my lungs burned, until I saw the dirt road where I had been dropped off. My driver was still waiting, eyes wide with horror as he saw me sprinting toward him. I threw myself into the car, barely managing to slam the door before shouting, "Go! Just go!" He didn't ask. He didn't hesitate. We sped away, leaving the village shrinking in the rearview mirror. I didn't look back. When we finally reached Ras Al Khaimah, I checked my camera. The images were still there, but in every frame, in every single shot, there was something wrong. In one, a figure stood in the window of a house I had passed. In another, multiple shadows stretched across the sand, though I had been alone. And in the very last image, the man from the alley standing right behind me, his face still blurred, his whispering lips frozen in time. That was the last abandoned village I ever photographed. The first time I heard about the Dara building, I dismissed it as just another urban legend. I had been living in Dubai for years, working as a journalist, covering everything from real estate fraud to ghost stories that locals whispered over tea. But this one was different. The residents of the area didn't just talk about it, they feared it. It started with a series of strange reports. People who lived nearby spoke of chandeliers swinging on their own, doors creaking open in the dead of night, and shadows moving where no one stood. Workers sent to demolish the building refused to enter, claiming they heard voices inside. Some even said that the structure itself didn't want to be destroyed. That was enough to pique my curiosity. I had debunked ghost stories before. What was one more? The building stood tucked away in a quiet part of Dara, its once grand facade now a faded memory. The windows were shattered, vines crawled up its walls, and the air smelled of dampness and dust. It had been abandoned since 2005, when its last tenants mysteriously vanished overnight. The official story was financial issues, but the locals believed something else had driven them out. I pushed through the rusted gates and stepped inside. The air changed instantly. It was heavy, almost suffocating, as if the walls themselves were pressing in on me. I switched on my flashlight, illuminating the grand foyer. It must have been beautiful once. The remains of a crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling, now covered in thick layers of dust. Broken tiles crunched beneath my boots as I moved further in, past an old reception desk with papers scattered across it, frozen in time. The silence was unsettling. Then came the footsteps. They were faint but distinct, coming from upstairs. I stopped breathing for a moment, listening carefully. I was alone. The security guards had refused to accompany me, claiming they didn't step foot inside after dark. I swallowed hard and moved toward the grand staircase, each step sending echoes through the empty halls. As I reached the second floor, the chandeliers above me creaked. I turned my flashlight upward and my breath hitched. They were swinging, not just one, all of them. A wave of cold rushed over me, sinking into my skin. I forced myself to keep moving. I needed to see more. The second floor was lined with old offices and apartments, their doors either locked or hanging off their hinges. As I stepped into one of the larger rooms, the walls whispered, not words, just faint, unintelligible murmurs like dozens of voices speaking at once. The temperature dropped and my breath fogged in the air. Something moved in the corner. I turned sharply, flashlight beam cutting through the dust. A shadow, but when I stepped closer, there was nothing there. I exhaled, trying to steady myself. Maybe the stories had gotten to me. Maybe it was just the wind, the decaying building playing tricks on my mind. Then something brushed past me. I jerked back, heart hammering. There was no one there, but I felt it. A presence, cold and deliberate. I needed answers. Digging through old records, I found something chilling. The last reported tenant of the building was a wealthy businessman named Farid Al-Masri. He owned several properties in Dubai, but vanished overnight in 2005, leaving behind his belongings, furniture, everything. No one knew where he had gone, but it was more than that. There were whispers that Farid had been involved in something dark, that he had made a deal, a pact, with something he shouldn't have, and I was beginning to think those whispers were true. I returned the next night. This time I brought a tape recorder, hoping to capture whatever was inside that building. At midnight I turned it on. The static buzzed for a few moments, then silence. I spoke into it, asking, "Is anyone here?" Nothing. I waited. Then, through the static, something answered. A voice, low, distorted. One word, trapped. My blood ran cold. I replayed the recording, but the word remained, trapped. I turned toward the hallway, my flashlight flickering. I felt it again, that presence watching me, and then I saw him, standing at the end of the hallway, just barely visible in the dim light, was a man in a dark suit. His face was blurred, shifting, like I wasn't meant to see it. I took a step back. My instincts screamed at me to run. The chandeliers above began to shake violently. The walls groaned as if the building itself was alive. I didn't wait. I bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping over my own feet. The whispers grew louder, turning into shouts, screams. The moment I stepped outside, the noise stopped. The night was silent. The building stood motionless, as if nothing had happened. I didn't sleep that night. I replayed the tape over and over, listening to that single word. Trapped. Farid never left that building, and neither did something else. The next morning I went back, this time with a demolition crew. The city had already planned to tear it down, but I wanted to see it happen with my own eyes. The workers refused to go inside. Instead, they set up their equipment, and within hours, the Dara building was nothing more than a pile of rubble. But as I turned to leave, I caught sight of something in the dust. A single black shoe, old, polished, exactly like the ones Farid Al-Masri was last seen wearing. And in that moment, I realized, whatever was trapped in that building might not be trapped anymore.